Atlanta 911 operator 6074.
I need somebody. I need Lake Haven Way right now.
Okay, sir.
Oh, my
Sir, you have to calm down, please. I can't help you like this.
God. Lake Haven Way, please. I think my wife was murdered. Tiffany! Tiffany!
When I first got to the neighborhood, I could see Mr. Pugh standing in the street. He looked frantic. He was waving his arms around. He kept repeatedly saying that his kids are in there, that his wife's not answering the phone. We drew our firearms and entered through the garage door. We moved from that ground floor level up the stairs where there was 2 juveniles sleeping in one of the bedrooms. They appeared to be unharmed. We ultimately got to a closed door that led to a bedroom. And then we found the victim. She was lying on her back in the bed. She was motionless. Her eye was extremely swollen, oozing blood and fluid. Also, there was a small infant on her chest, crying and kind of tugging at her hair. I checked her for a pulse or any other signs of life, and there was no pulse.
It was pretty obvious to me that she was killed by gunshots. There was a bullet hole in the wall behind her, and there was blood everywhere.
Tiffany was found with 2 bullets in her body. One to her lower chest area right under her breast, and then 1 shot to her eye. Because of the trajectory of the bullet, we knew that the first shot had to come from outside of the bedroom, and then the person who killed Tiffany got closer inside and then shot her in the face.
I did a walkthrough of the house. Nothing was in disarray. Didn't look like anything had been taken from the incident. So initially, it appeared to me that it wasn't a burglary.
As we went downstairs, we did see in a bedroom that's on that basement level, a window. The screen was actually removed out as if someone cut the screen out purposefully and opened the window to allow someone to enter into the space.
It appeared to be our point of entry, and everything tells us something. And what that tells us is it's quite possible that it was planned. We initially felt like it was a targeted attack. With any homicide investigation, it's all hands on deck.
Our family was pretty close. My wife and Tiffany spoke every single day and twice on the weekend. She was 5 years older than her brother, so she became kind of like a built-in babysitter and always protective of him. She was very close to her brother. She was never really wild. She was focused on going to college and landed at Clark Atlanta University. Out of college, she worked at Delta first as an analyst, and then she got promoted to be a category manager. She was very, very, very proud to have moved to that level, and I was proud of her as well. So she was very excited about where she was going.
When I first met Tiffany, she always had a smile on her face. You just kind of gravitate to her because she's just so full of energy that you could just feel the moment that you meet her. She and I got closer as she was expecting her first child. I enjoyed going to her house and, kind of watching her be a mother. And she was just caring, loving, nurturing. She was just, such a wonderful person. I miss that bond and that connection.
When talking to Mr. Pugh, he had no tears. People grieve in different ways. I can't say that I've never seen anybody that didn't have any tears when they just lost their wife. And I took note of that. and we decided to investigate Andre. I was able to do some research and find out that the East Point police were called to his house on a domestic disturbance in January of the same year, in which a gun is involved. At the time, officers on the scene learned that the marriage was coming to an end. Tiffany was going to be looking for an apartment. She was leaving him. That could be a motive. At this point in the investigation, we see everyone involved as possible suspects. Even though I had questions that I needed answers to. It's very important that the person that you're interviewing feels like that you're on their side. This man has just lost his wife. Myself and Lieutenant Buchanan went in very sensitive and very sympathetic. This is Lieutenant Buchanan. I appreciate you talking to us.
Oh, it's no problem.
They say you're a big DJ?
I am.
Pretty good?
Very well. I mean, I was DJ about 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I met everyone there is to meet, and I had a very good night tonight, and I'm still kind of upset I'm holding all this money on me right now.
Mm-hmm. If you would, just give me your start to finish version of what happened.
Okay, I work at Club Onyx, which is, of course, the strip club downtown. Had a good night. Left work probably about 5:15 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I received a phone call from ADT, and they left me a voicemail saying, your alarm is going off, please call me. So I called the number back. I said, did you notify the police? She said, yes, East Point police has been notified. I said, if you don't mind, can you just turn off the alarm? That way you don't wake up the kids. At that point, I called my wife. Called her 3 times. She didn't answer. Once I called her, I called Cliff. He's a manager at Club Onyx. I said, I need you to come to the house ASAP.
Speaking to Andre, I felt like we were getting some information that wasn't adding up. I mean, he's just lost his wife and didn't have a lot of emotion. And why'd you have him cut the alarm off if somebody's in your house? Those things gave me pause. What did you do the minute you got home?
I go into the house. When I go into the house, I look in the dining room. Then her door, because she usually sleeps downstairs on Saturdays because I work late. So I said, Tiff, babe. So I turned on the light and I just saw a body. I said, babe.
Did you notice anything when you saw her?
It just was like she was asleep.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it just like you laying in the bed. I mean, again, it just was a body. I did not go and say, babe, I did not do that.
Okay.
I didn't notice any blood or anything. I just
okay.
Just there.
Then why did you not go and try to wake her up?
Oh, I wasn't. I was looking for my kids. I was scared. I ain't gonna lie, I was scared.
He admitted that he turned on the light. There's no way he couldn't have seen blood had he turned on the light. Her body would have been 5 to 8 feet total away from the light switch. At this point, we don't believe we're getting the whole truth, so we need to get more direct in our questioning.
So I don't understand. You say when you went to see your wife, did you touch her? Did you say, hey, baby, did you grab her?
No, I didn't get that close to her.
Why?
I just saw a shadow. I mean,
that makes no sense to what you're telling me, and that's why I'm trying to get some sense about this.
Right? Why does it not?
Because I'm married, and if I call my wife, I'm gonna go hello, and I'm gonna go. You hear me talking to you? I'm gonna shake her. I'm gonna touch her. I'm gonna walk up to her. You're saying you saw her shadow.
No, I didn't say I saw a shadow. I saw a body in the bed.
Did you see any blood? Did you see?
No, I didn't see none of that.
So what would make you think something's wrong with her?
Because she was just unresponsive. She never unresponsive.
Did you touch her? Is what I'm asking you.
No, I did not touch her.
So how you know she's unresponsive?
Because she didn't respond to me.
I just don't understand this.
I mean, it feels like you're trying to.
This was not a random act, and that's what you should know, and you should be concerned about.
And I'm very concerned.
Somebody came and killed your wife. It's impossible for you to have walked in that room and turned on the light without knowing she was shot. That's impossible.
Trying to tell you what I saw. I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
What part of your body did you see that?
There was blood everywhere, man.
I mean, you can't do it.
I mean,
It's like walking
she had
the
the
room down
burgundy-
into the chair.
She had a burgundy. We got burgundy comforters. I looked, and I just ran upstairs to check on the kids. I called her. She didn't move. I ran upstairs.
You know, you told her already your dispatcher, I think my wife is dead.
Right. I mean, I
But
called
why
her.
would you think that? Because you called her name. You had to see she was shot, sir. You had to.
I'm not a professional.
You don't have to be a professional. This just common sense looking, you know?
Nothing's taken out of the house. Wasn't a robbery. Nothing.
And that's, I mean, I'm trying to figure it out.
Why would somebody just come kill your wife?
I don't know.
Was she in a mob? Is that your only problem?
Yes. Again, I don't know what's going on. But that's my heart. She's my heart, man. My wife.
Y'all have any domestic problems?
No, we didn't have no physical domestic problem. But we was going through it a little bit, but nothing physical. It was basically disagreement. No, she never called the police on me.
Because we have a record of her calling the police on you multiple times here.
Multiple times?
Yes, so that you had a gun and she was afraid of you. Oh, and she thought you were loading a gun and you're not familiar with this report?
Oh, that was, I remember that. That was, she called that thinking I had a gun, where I was loading the gun, where that was not a gun. That was the statement.
Well, why would she? What was
Because
going on for her to think that? I mean,
because
I was been fighting or something, because I load my gun every day and my wife ain't never called the police on me.
No,
Just getting an apartment.
she was getting one. She was about to move out.
Were you happy about that?
No, we was discussing that. We was actually about to start counseling. I was having an affair. And she got upset. And we started to, she basically took her rings off. And then we reconciled. Back in February.
And y'all had some problems.
I mean, we young couple, we had problems, but we had good days too.
Oh, you saying you didn't do this, right?
No!
Okay, let me ask you a question. Did you hire anybody to do this?
No! What money?
There's questions that we have to ask.
We have to answer this. We have to.
I understand. I understand you have to ask these questions, but I'm not your man, brother. I'm not. I am not your man. Honestly, I feel like you're trying to beat me up to say, yeah.
No, I'm not trying to, no, because let me tell you something. The truth always comes out, so I don't have to beat anybody. And the biggest thing that helps is you have a video system, and we're going to go through that video system left and right. So if you're telling the truth, I mean, you don't have anything to worry about.
I'm trying to figure this out just like you trying to figure it out. And I hope you get to the bottom of it.
At the end of my interview with Andre, some of his answers didn't really jive with us. A normal person, if they feel their wife has been killed, they're gonna go check on them. Or if you're gonna say that your wife is dead, you probably should know that. At that point, I feel like he might be involved in this. I just want to know to what extent. Cliff Adams was the boss of Andre Pugh. In the interview with Mr. Adams, he told us that Andre called him and told him that someone had broken in and came in through the basement of his house, and this was even before Andre had made it home. That was a pretty odd statement, as we called the alarm company and found out the alarm sensor that went off was on the dining room. Andre Pugh could not have known that someone came in through the basement of his house before he's even made it home. Andre had camera on the right side of the house, left side of the house, on the porch of the house, 2 on the back side of the house, inside the foyer of the house, but the shooter was able to evade all video cameras in the house.
We believe the person who had to have committed this crime knew the house and knew how to avoid all the surveillance camera systems. No camera picked up anything until right after the murder. When we see Tiffany's son, We believe he sees someone leaving, which is why he's walking to the door. And then unfortunately, when the child comes back towards the camera, you can actually see what we believe to be blood on his onesie. We believe the baby was in the room when the shots occur because of how quickly you see him on camera after the shooting. It's heartbreaking. In the video, there was this black car that kept circling the block. And the reason why we know it was the same black car is because her front light was out. Then we see another car that pulls off in a cul-de-sac. And we noticed that there was a car registered to Andre that was similar to the car on the surveillance video. And so we're now watching how these two cars interact with each other. And then right before the murder, we see the black car pull up to the house. And we see that other car that was in the cul-de-sac leave. We believe that these two cars have something to do with the murder. We needed to find this black car with this one headlight out. Speaking with Tiffany's friends and family, Andre had been cheating on her for years. Tiffany was the breadwinner in the home. She was ready to move forward with the divorce. And Tiffany wanted to sell the house. And Andre wasn't able to afford the house that they were living in. This was a huge 4-level home. He had his man cave downstairs, his movie theater. This was going to be gone for him. He was a very flashy individual. He was someone who wanted to parade around with money and things of that nature. So he was going to lose his lifestyle.
Tommy Jackson, Tiffany's dad, had expressed some concern about her safety and wanted her to leave a little bit sooner than she did. And he said, hey, I don't know if you know this, but Andre has a second cell phone. During our initial interview with Andre, he made it very clear to me that that was his only cell phone.
Is that your only phone?
Yes.
Once we found that out, I obtained search warrants and went to Mr. Pugh's house to secure that second cell phone.
I know it's not easy, but you're here.
I understand. I need to get, you've got another phone.
Okay.
I need to get that from you. I've got a search warrant here.
Okay.
Is it this is in your name, right?
No, this is not in my name.
Okay, whose name is this one?
This is actually in a friend's name.
Okay. And who's that?
Adrian Harley. They lent me this phone yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yeah.
When Andre told me his story, I didn't buy it one bit. For weeks, Andre called Tommy Jackson on that phone number. Now we need to find out, why are you not telling us the truth?
A horrendous crime.
Police found Tiffany Pugh's body in one of the bedrooms of the home, and one of the children in the home was clinging to the woman's body.
My worst fear came to reality, but I still didn't believe it was happening to me, even though I knew in my heart that it did happen. The police told me that they were suspecting Andre because of some of his answers were not adding up. But if you weren't involved, then what reason would you have to not tell the police everything?
We do an extraction of the data and found out that between the two cell phones, there's some missing deleted texts before and after the murder from someone named Adrian Harley. And then we were able to determine that he lived in Alpharetta, Georgia, and one of the vehicles that were registered to his address, an Infiniti, closely matched the vehicle that had pulled up to the Pugh household the night of the murder. We knew from the neighbor's video that there appeared to be two different vehicles that were involved in this crime. My first instinct was that Andre and Adrian were involved in the murder.
We learned Agent Harley is the best friend of Andre Pugh. He was the best man at their wedding. He was the godfather to their son. So he had a position of trust with Andre. The cell phone towers showed Andre and Adrian traveling together towards the home right before the murder. Then it also showed Adrian's cell phone circling the neighborhood around the same time that we saw that black car with the driver's side parking light out in the surveillance video. And it showed Andre's phone also in the neighborhood right before the murder. That was a red flag for law enforcement because when Andre told police that he was near Club Onyx, the phone records show he's lying.
I went to Adrian's house. Before I get his cell phone, I wanted to talk to Mr. Harley to find out his whereabouts the night of the murder. How well do you know Andre?
I've grown up with him. I was the best man at the wedding. I'm the youngest son's godfather.
I just want to talk to you about what your timeline was that night and before and after.
At the club with him.
At the club?
Yes,
At
sir.
which club?
Club Onyx.
Club Onyx.
Yes, sir.
And then after the club, where did you go?
I went over to Felix Bar.
Where is that?
That's down the street from Onyx.
Okay, and then about what time was that?
5 o'clock, roundabout, and then I came home.
Okay, so basically the whole night of Saturday night, Sunday, you were at Club Onyx area and then you came back home, which is here. Okay. I didn't call Adrian out immediately. I knew he was lying at that point because I already had his cell phone records that actually showed him in the area of the murder at the time of the murder. But my plan was to go see the car, get his cell phone, and then continue my investigation. Do you have your phone with you?
I have my work phone, yes.
Okay, can I see it?
No, you can't.
Okay, I've got a search warrant.
Okay, take it out.
You don't have any weapons on you, do you?
No, my weapons are in my vehicle.
Okay. I'm getting my jacket. Can you stand by just a second with Sergeant Walters? I'll be right back. Once I started explaining to Adrian Harley that I needed to take his cell phone, his facial expressions had changed a little bit from cordial to a little bit apprehensive. At that time, I called Alpharetta Police Department to assist us. If somebody tells you they have weapons in their car, what's to say they don't have a weapon on them? By the time I got out of the car, Mr. Harley was waving his arms, screaming, yelling.
I want you to call
Alpharetta
your
PD is on the way here.
Yes,
sir, if you go toward your car, you're going to be arrested.
my vehicle.
You're going to stay right here.
Oh, no. I didn't touch you. I didn't touch you. My hands are away. If you want me from my vehicle.
I'm going to tase you.
If you want me from my vehicle, that's
Put your hand behind your back. Behind your back. I'm telling you. Put your hands behind your back. What's that? Raquel! I'm telling you. Raquel! They know where we are. Police brutality! Go ahead, get off red eye. Just put your hands where I can see them. Cuff him, please.
Mr. Harley became very agitated. He was screaming to his girlfriend in her apartment, and we're trying to keep him away from his car because he's already told us he has weapons there.
Close the door! No, close both doors. I close both doors. I don't trust these motherfuckers. Close the door! Close the damn door! Calm down, man.
No, not when this man, this motherfucker.
Explain something to you.
No, you shut up until operator comes. Call operator PD, you lied.
You find his phone?
Oh, it's right here.
I don't feel any warrants. I have not read any warrants, so therefore you lied. Therefore you lied.
Listen, I'm just explaining why I'm here, okay? I didn't drive all the way to Alpharetta from East Point, not even on my shift, for no reason, okay? All right. You can keep on with all the attitude you want.
I called
okay?
you, sir.
You told me you were nowhere near East Point the night of the murder, okay? I've got you on video at the murder scene, okay? I got you on
if you say
your
so,
cell
I would love
tower,
to see it.
okay? Your cell phone was hitting your cell tower at the murder location, okay? That's why I'm here.
While we were waiting on the tow truck to come and tow the vehicle, you could see that the running light on the left side of the car, the driver's side, was out, which matched the video that we had. Parking light working, driver's side not.
Smoking freaking gun.
I felt like I'd found the bad guy that night. I've got everything in this case that I need.
You're my shooter.
If you want to clearly
okay?
see,
Listen, you're my shooter.
If you want to clearly hold that up so I can see
and you're going to go to jail
instead
for
of
the rest of
flashing
your
it.
life. Just want to let you know that. That's happening. It's
Clearly
happening.
hold that up so I
It's
can
happening.
see.
It's happening. Just so you know, the gig's
I
up.
can see.
Is it okay to talk about what's going on?
I don't know anything. I'm just straightforward. I don't know what the situation. I do not feel comfortable speaking about that without a lawyer because I don't know anything.
All right, fair enough. When Adrian requested a lawyer, it wasn't frustrating to me.
All right, you come this way.
At this point in the investigation, I know what happened, start to finish. We had a really great case, and we were going to bring closure to this because we had so much evidence. We drove straight to Club Onyx and met with Atlanta Police Department's fugitive squad, and we decided to wait until the club closed to make the arrest, knowing that this was a gun crime. The fugitive squad moved in and were able to make an arrest of Mr. Pugh at the DJ booth without incident. When Andre was taken to the station, he had been Mirandized and he talked while he was in the car. Okay, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and part of the crime of burglary.
I'm gonna go kill my wife and leave me the house. And she's giving me child support. Make sense out of that.
All I can make sense out of, Andre, is the evidence. That's what I can make sense out of.
What evidence?
You planned to have your wife murdered, okay? I'm gonna prove to a jury of 12 people that that's what you set up. I'm going to prove it through your records, I'm going to prove it through testimony from others, and I'm going to prove it from the person that actually shot your wife and killed her. On the way to the interview room with Andre, he blurted out that Adrian had killed Tiffany before I was even able to get a chance to record that interaction. Okay, say that again. He came up to Club Onyx.
Right, to work.
And did what now?
Well, he came in the booth, he hugged me.
Mm-hmm.
He said, listen, I killed your wife. And I said, what the are you talking about? Are you insane? You killed my wife.
Did you ask him why he killed your wife?
Now, Adrian has a real bad temper. When me and my wife got into it back in January, she accused Adrian of stealing some money from her. And he got pissed off about that, and he told me, he's like, man, I'm gonna do something to her. And I was like, man, chill, that's my wife. It's not that serious. If you need money, I'll give you money. But you don't have to do nothing to her. Then he just left it at that. I thought everything was good.
And again, did he tell you why he killed your wife?
He didn't say. He said something about he was pissed off from back then. And I told him back then, chill.
You didn't think to punch him, or?
I mean, I said, what the are you talking about? I'm in shock. You come to me and we supposed to be best friends. I mean, knowing each other forever. And I'm like, you said what? And I was just dumbfounded.
Your reaction, if someone came and confessed that they killed your wife, would not be, oh, why'd you do that? That's just not, to me, a natural response. He didn't call the police, and he kept DJing. And so when I heard this so-called news story, I knew it was a lie.
We wanted to nail him down on his timeline for his whereabouts on the night of the murder. I want Mr. Pugh to keep talking to me, because the more someone talks, the more they end up incriminating themselves if they're involved in a crime. Okay, you're telling me you had nothing to do with it. Okay, you're a grown man. I would love for you to tell me your side of the story, man to man, what happened from start to finish.
I'm trying to clear my name, Detective Glover. So, whatever to do to clear my name and get back with my kids and my family, I'm willing to help you.
Okay, we could start from the beginning.
Okay, so, get to the club. Work is normal. Adrian Harley shows up. He usually gets to the club about 10:30 p.m. Not sure if it was 11:30 or 12:30, but he said, yo, my stomach is hurting. I need to go to the bathroom. I'm gonna leave for a little bit. I said, fine, I'll hold it down. So he leaves, and he's gone for probably about maybe 2 hours or so. I think I texted him, yo, you know, where you at? What's good? Replied back, you know, still in the bathroom. So I said, okay, fine. Kept on working. I didn't see him again until about maybe 4 o'clock, 4:45. I think I walked out the club right around 5 a.m. I noticed that I had a voicemail from an 800 number. It was the ADT.
Okay, ADT told you on the phone that there was a dining room alarm.
Correct.
Then you called, according to your call records, Tiffany one time, and then Cliff. And according to Cliff, you told Cliff that your house had been broken into.
Right.
And they came in through the basement.
Right.
How is it you knew that? You have not been to your home yet.
Because in my dining room, nobody would go through there.
Why would they not go through there?
Because I have 2 big bright lights right there. Only thing I could think of was the basement window. And I'm not sure if I even told Cliff they came through the basement.
Cliff was pretty clear. He already knew that Adrian came in through the basement, but they weren't expecting the alarm to go off. And when it did, it short-circuited everything. It makes it very clear for a jury of 12 that he's lying. Okay. When I interviewed you that morning,
right,
I asked you for your phone.
Right.
Okay, I said, do you have any other phones where I can reach you?
Right.
And you said?
No.
No.
Right.
Okay. When all this time, you had the phone, the 740 number?
No, I did not have that all this time.
Okay, you didn't?
No, I had sold that phone to Adrian.
Okay, Mr. Jackson, Tiffany's father, said that he texts you back and forth on that phone regularly.
No, that's not true, because he didn't even know that number. Because that number was just given to Adrian.
Okay. Mr. Jackson called us and said he has 2 phones, and he specifically gave us that phone number. He's lying. Text messages to and from Mr. Jackson prove that this is a lie. But the interviews were very, very important, though, because I can show the jury the lies. All the text messages from the day of the murder, that time frame around there, have been deleted from your phone.
That's what I don't understand or know how or know why.
Is your phone a conspirator? Did your phone say, I want to try and get my boss who owns me in trouble, and delete your text messages and then put your phone in? Why would I delete my text messages? Because you set up your wife to be murdered and you don't want the detectives who are about to talk to you to find them.
You could have found them because there was nothing in there saying, kill my wife. I did not.
Then why delete them?
I didn't delete them. That's the crazy part.
At this point, I'm trying to poke the bear. Like, look, man, I mean, none of your lies have panned out. And we decided to show him his cell phone records at the time of the murder to incite panic, and then maybe he'd tell me some real truth. Okay. See right here?
Okay.
If you're in your subdivision, you're hitting on this tower. You were in your neighborhood when you called ADT. Let me finish. When you finished the call with ADT, you were near Camp Creek at 285.
When I finished the call.
When you started the call to ADT, you were in your neighborhood.
So I leave my subdivision to drive to 285 to come back. Don't make sense.
But no. Yes, it does make sense. This is how it makes sense. All right, you ready? This is where it makes sense. Because there's 2 cars in the cul-de-sac before the robbery. Okay? 2 cars. One person is Adrian's car, because I've already got it on video. The second car is your car, because I got it on video. And Adrian goes in, kills your wife, and then guess what? Oh, the alarm went off. Crap! I planned this murder. I planned to kill my wife. It was all set up perfect. Guess what I do? I call ADT, and I've got to get the hell out of the neighborhood because my alarm's going off. So I hustle up to Camp Creek at 285, tell them I'm 15 minutes away so that I can be away from my house and turn around and come back. Okay? That's how, when you called ADT, you were in this area where your house is. And when you finished the call to ADT, you were at Camp Creek at 285.
That's not
Tell me.
That's not true.
Okay. I mean, that's your cell records, man. It's not my cell records. That's yours. That's yours.
I did not drive over there because I was not in the cul-de-sac.
Okay, why does your neighbor's video show your car in the cul-de-sac?
No, it does not show my car.
It not only shows your car in the cul-de-sac, it shows your cell phone in the cul-de-sac. That's what I'm getting. I can't get it right.
And I can't understand that. My cell phone was not in there because I was not over there.
That's not according to your cell records. And because of your cell records, and because of what you've said, because of what you keep telling me that doesn't add up, is why you have this. This is an arrest warrant. I'm telling him he had his wife killed. He's not even mad at me? I mean, that body language is huge. I think he's finally realized he's defeated. He lost. Last night, when I came to your house,
I was nowhere near that man when he entered.
You're just saying you're gonna agree to disagree. Is it not weird to you that the people that broke into your house knew to miss every camera?
The crazy part is the person that broke into my house, as he told me, he's the one that shot my wife. He knows my camera system.
Who, Adrian?
He told me he was over there. He told me that.
Yeah. Y'all are both hitting the same sector of the same cell site in the same subdivision.
I wasn't there.
Andre, the truth is the truth is the truth is the truth. There's nothing left for me to get. I have all of the evidence. I can show the jury he is a compulsive liar. It comes so easily to him, it rolls off his tongue. And he's going to have to pay the price now.
Murder for hire. That's what police say a husband, Andre Pugh, also known as DJ Awesome of Club Onyx, and a hitman, Adrian Harley, carried out within this home as his wife wanted to leave him. They say the two men staged it to look like a burglary, but police say Pugh's account to police did not add up.
Mr. Pugh can't keep his story straight. He can't remember one lie from the next.
I asked him, what do you mean you saw a body? He said, she always wakes up when I call her name. Always. I said, did you see any blood on her? No. Did you see she had been shot? No.
Both his lies, the lies of Adrian, coupled with the cell phone records, the surveillance video, all of that is what helped us prove that these are the two individuals responsible for this crime.
How could you destroy yourself and your family? How could you do that? But knowing that we got a conviction in both cases, I feel that as much as justice can be served, it's been served.
Their actions were evil, and now two children are left without parents. It's beyond tragic. You can never bring Tiffany back, unfortunately, but what I hope and I pray is that this chapter can be closed.
This was a true victim that had her whole life ahead of her. We were not going to let this case go without solving it, and I'll never forget it.
I just miss her spirit. I remember those days of going to visit her. I think about her all the time, full of life.
I miss talking to her on the phone. We did that every Sunday to stay close. Tiffany, I love you and I miss you very much. I wish you were here.
I'm 21 years old. I have my whole life ahead of me. Those could have been the final dreams Patricia Lockwood carried with her as she stepped into another ordinary day, unaware that history was quietly preparing to erase her future. Decades later, investigators would still stand in front of faded photographs, yellowed reports, and brittle evidence bags asking the same impossible question. Who silenced Patricia Lockwood? And why would it take nearly half a century before science finally pointed to the man investigators had never been able to confront? Cold cases rarely begin as cold cases. They begin with optimism. Detectives believe the evidence will speak. Witnesses promise they remember everything. Families cling to the certainty that an arrest is only days away. But time has a cruel way of transforming certainty into doubt and doubt into silence. In Patricia Lockwood's case, silence became the loudest witness of them all. The year was 1972. America was changing at breathtaking speed. The Vietnam War dominated headlines. Watergate had not yet exploded into a national scandal. Small towns still believed violent crime belonged somewhere else, somewhere far beyond familiar neighborhoods and quiet streets. Doors were left unlocked. Neighbors knew one another by name. Young women often believed they could travel alone without fearing that an ordinary afternoon would become the final chapter of their lives. Patricia Lockwood fit naturally into that world. Friends remembered a young woman with plans, ambitions, and an easy smile that made strangers comfortable. She was building a future rather than running from the past. Nothing about her daily routine suggested danger. Nothing hinted that investigators decades later would spend countless hours reconstructing her final movements minute by minute, hoping to discover one tiny detail everyone else had overlooked. No one remembers the exact moment when an ordinary day becomes extraordinary. It happens without warning. One decision, one stop along the road, one unexpected encounter, A stranger whose name is never learned. A vehicle that disappears before anyone notices. A face remembered only after it is far too late. When Patricia failed to return as expected, concern spread quietly at first. Family members made phone calls. Friends checked familiar locations. Employers wondered if something unexpected had delayed her. At the beginning, every explanation seemed more reasonable than violence. Perhaps her car had broken down. Perhaps she had visited someone unexpectedly. Perhaps she simply forgot to call. Hours passed. Then more hours. Hope slowly surrendered to fear. Missing person investigations often depend on speed. Every passing hour weakens memories. Tire tracks disappear beneath new traffic. Rain washes away footprints. Witnesses forget the color of a jacket or the direction a car traveled. Detectives understand this better than anyone, yet they also know that resources are limited. In the early 1970s, missing adults were not always treated with the urgency they receive today. Many cases began with the assumption that the missing person had chosen to leave voluntarily. Patricia's loved ones rejected that idea immediately. This was not someone who simply vanished. Something had happened. Somewhere, someone already knew exactly what had happened. The search intensified. Volunteers spread across fields and wooded areas. Officers questioned residents. Roads were retraced. Every location Patricia was known to have visited became another point on an expanding map covered with pins and handwritten notes. Investigators searched not only for Patricia herself, but for something equally valuable, a witness who had noticed the wrong car, the wrong conversation, or the wrong stranger at exactly the right moment. Sometimes the smallest observation becomes the key to solving a murder. Sometimes nobody notices anything. That possibility haunted investigators almost immediately. Then came the discovery no family ever wants to receive. Patricia Lockwood had not disappeared voluntarily. She had been murdered. The atmosphere surrounding the investigation changed instantly. Every routine interview became a homicide interview. Every acquaintance became a possible suspect. Every unexplained movement demanded closer examination. Detectives no longer searched for a missing woman. They hunted for a killer who had already proven capable of extraordinary violence. Crime scene investigators approached the location with methods considered advanced for their era. Photographs documented every angle before evidence was collected. Measurements were recorded carefully. Physical traces that appeared insignificant to the naked eye were preserved whenever possible. Yet the early 1970s remained a challenging period for forensic science. DNA profiling did not exist. Digital databases were decades away. Surveillance cameras were almost non-existent. Mobile phones could not record movements. Every investigation depended overwhelmingly upon human memory and physical evidence visible enough to survive. The killer could not have known any of that. Or perhaps he understood it perfectly. Investigators began asking the same uncomfortable question repeatedly. Was Patricia chosen specifically? Or was she simply in the wrong place when a predator happened to cross her path? Victimology became the foundation of the investigation. Detectives examined her relationships, employment, daily habits, friendships, financial records, and recent conversations. They searched for arguments, romantic conflicts, jealous acquaintances, anyone who might possess motive. Nothing immediately explained such brutality. Family members cooperated fully. Friends answered difficult questions again and again. Employers reviewed schedules. Neighbors described normal routines. Instead of narrowing the suspect list, each interview expanded it. The unknown offender remained exactly that, unknown. As local newspapers began reporting the homicide, fear spread through the community with astonishing speed. Parents instructed daughters never to travel alone. Businesses closed earlier than usual. Ordinary strangers suddenly attracted suspicion. Every unfamiliar vehicle seemed worth remembering. Every man walking alone became someone neighbors quietly discussed behind closed curtains. The murder had transformed more than one family's life. It had transformed an entire community's sense of safety. Investigators worked exhausting hours following every lead available. Anonymous callers claimed to possess information. Some described suspicious vehicles. Others identified possible suspects. Former boyfriends were questioned. Acquaintances provided alibis. Rumors multiplied faster than facts. One tip pointed detectives toward an individual whose behavior appeared unusual shortly after Patricia disappeared. Another suggested someone had confessed while intoxicated. A different witness insisted a strange vehicle had been seen near the relevant area. Every possibility demanded attention. Most collapsed within days. Some lasted weeks. None produced sufficient evidence. As weeks turned into months, frustration settled over the investigation. Detectives understood that killers often make mistakes shortly after committing violent crimes. They may revisit scenes. They may discuss details only the offender should know. They may suddenly change routines or dispose of belongings unexpectedly. Officers watched, interviewed, compared statements, re-interviewed witnesses whose memories had already begun fading. Still nothing. Every promising path eventually reached another dead end. Behind the scenes, forensic specialists preserved physical evidence with remarkable care despite the technological limitations of the era. Biological samples, clothing, trace materials, photographs, handwritten notes, and laboratory reports were cataloged. No one imagined those sealed packages might eventually survive long enough to outlive the detectives who first collected them. Evidence has its own relationship with time. Sometimes it grows weaker. Sometimes it becomes stronger. A fingerprint does not become less unique after 50 years. A biological sample does not lose its story simply because science has not yet learned how to read it. The investigators of 1972 could not know future technology would someday transform forgotten evidence into a silent eyewitness. But before that future arrived, the case would drift steadily toward the category every detective dreads: unsolved. The original investigative team refused to surrender easily. They reconstructed Patricia's final known movements repeatedly, searching for inconsistencies. Timelines were adjusted. Distances were recalculated. Witnesses were interviewed again after months had passed, hoping forgotten details might suddenly return. Occasionally they did. A driver remembered passing a particular intersection. A resident recalled hearing an unfamiliar vehicle. Someone believed they recognized a description published in the newspaper. Every recovered memory generated fresh excitement. Every new lead eventually faded. The emotional cost proved devastating. Patricia's family found themselves trapped in an endless cycle of hope followed by disappointment. Every ringing telephone suggested an arrest might finally be coming. Every detective's visit raised expectations. Every update ended the same way. Not yet. No definitive suspect. No charges. No answers. Birthdays passed. Holidays arrived and disappeared. Family photographs gained new faces while Patricia remained forever young in every frame. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond public attention, the killer continued living an ordinary life. Perhaps he worked beside people who never suspected him. Perhaps he married. Perhaps he raised children. Perhaps he watched television reports about unsolved murders with complete confidence that his own secret would remain buried forever. That possibility disturbed investigators more than almost anything else. Because statistically, many violent offenders do exactly that. They adapt. They blend into ordinary society. They become neighbors, co-workers, church members, respected citizens. Their greatest disguise is normality. Years later, younger detectives inherited boxes filled with reports written by officers they had never met. Cardboard containers replaced active case files. Dust settled across forgotten shelves inside evidence rooms. The names of retired investigators appeared only on aging paperwork, their handwritten notes becoming conversations across generations. One detective reportedly described cold cases as messages sent into the future. The people collecting evidence today may never solve the crime themselves. They collect it for someone who eventually will. In Patricia Lockwood's case, that philosophy would prove astonishingly accurate. Long before advanced DNA analysis became a household phrase, before genetic genealogy revolutionized criminal investigations across America, before families of unidentified victims finally began receiving long-awaited answers, the evidence from Patricia's murder remained quietly preserved, waiting for science to catch up with a killer who believed time itself had become his greatest accomplice. He could not possibly imagine that every passing year, every decade, every technological breakthrough was slowly turning against him. 50 years is an eternity for grieving families, but in a life of physical evidence, it can be nothing more than a countdown waiting for the moment when one microscopic fragment finally speaks louder than every lie, every false lead, and every unanswered question that had haunted Patricia Lockwood's name for generations. For decades, the investigation existed in a strange state between persistence and resignation. Officially, the murder of Patricia Lockwood was still open. Unofficially, it had become one of those cases detectives quietly carried with them from office to office, from one generation to the next, knowing every new assignment pushed it a little farther down the priority list. The evidence remained sealed. The photographs remained untouched. The questions remained exactly where they had been left. Only the people asking them grew older. Every cold case develops its own mythology. Rumors slowly replace verified facts. Neighbors begin adding details they never witnessed. Memories become polished by repetition. A suspicious stranger becomes a mysterious drifter. An ordinary argument becomes a possible motive. A passing vehicle becomes a ghostly clue that no report can ever confirm. Investigators understand this phenomenon all too well. Time does not simply erase memories. It rewrites them. That made Patricia's case increasingly difficult. Witnesses who had once been certain suddenly admitted uncertainty. I think it was blue. No, maybe green. I remember seeing him. Or perhaps that was someone else. Each revised recollection complicated an already fragile timeline. Detectives returned repeatedly to the final confirmed hours of Patricia's life. Every appointment, every conversation, every road she was known to travel. Large paper maps covered conference room walls. Colored pins marked locations. Thin strings connected one stop to another, creating a visual reconstruction of movements that no surveillance camera had ever recorded. Somewhere within those ordinary movements, violence had interrupted everything. The problem was identifying exactly where. And exactly when. Crime scene analysts revisited every photograph taken during the original investigation. Black and white images captured more than investigators had initially realized. Tire impressions. Vegetation disturbed in unusual ways. Tiny objects resting just beyond the obvious focal points of each frame. Modern eyes often see details previous generations overlooked, not because earlier detectives lacked skill, but because they lacked today's understanding of forensic significance. Still, photographs alone could not identify a killer. Investigators needed a person, a face, a name. Instead, they encountered dozens. One individual had reportedly behaved nervously after Patricia disappeared. Another allegedly left town shortly afterward. Someone else supposedly resembled a witness description. Each candidate generated excitement inside the investigative team. Each ultimately slipped away under closer examination. Some possessed airtight alibis. Others simply could not be connected to Patricia in any meaningful way. Suspicion, detectives often say, is not evidence. And evidence was exactly what they lacked. The murder weapon had not delivered a confession. No fingerprints suddenly appeared inside a national database. No anonymous letter arrived naming the offender. No deathbed admission reached investigators. Silence continued protecting whoever had taken Patricia's life. As months became years, another painful reality emerged. The original detectives were beginning to retire. Experience left the department one pension at a time. Men and women who had walked the crime scene themselves packed their desks into cardboard boxes, leaving behind handwritten notebooks that younger investigators studied almost like sacred texts. Margins contained observations never included in official reports. Question marks circled witness statements. Tiny arrows pointed toward theories that had never been fully explored. Some pages carried coffee stains and fingerprints from countless late-night reviews. Those notes revealed something impossible to measure: hope. The original investigators never truly stopped believing they could solve the case, even when statistics argued otherwise. One retired detective reportedly admitted that Patricia's murder still visited him in dreams, not because he remembered every detail, but because he remembered the family. Families change homicide investigations. Evidence becomes personal. Photographs become impossible to forget. A grieving mother waiting beside a telephone carries more emotional weight than any laboratory report ever could. The Lockwood family refused to let Patricia disappear into history. Anniversaries became moments of remembrance. Newspaper interviews renewed public attention. Community members continued discussing the murder years after headlines faded elsewhere. Someone out there knew something. That belief never completely vanished. Neither did fear. Although decades had passed, the idea that Patricia's killer had never faced justice unsettled everyone familiar with the case. Children who had not even been born when the murder occurred grew up hearing about it from parents and grandparents. Don't take unnecessary risks. Be careful driving alone. Remember what happened to Patricia? Her name evolved into more than a victim's identity. It became a warning. Meanwhile, advances in criminal profiling began influencing investigators across the country. Behavioral analysts examined patterns rather than isolated evidence. What kind of offender commits this crime? Was the attack planned? Was Patricia specifically targeted? Did the killer know the area well? Would he likely offend again? These questions produce theories. Some believed the offender had personal knowledge of Patricia. Others argued she encountered a stranger whose violent tendencies escalated unexpectedly. Neither explanation fully satisfied investigators. The available evidence supported neither with certainty. And certainty mattered, because prosecutors cannot present theories to juries. They present proof. Years slipped quietly into decades. The evidence locker remained one of the few places untouched by changing fashions, political administrations, or technological revolutions. Brown paper envelopes sat beside carefully labeled boxes, every item preserved according to the best practices available at the time. Ironically, what seemed insignificant in 1972 gradually became priceless. Tiny biological traces, microscopic fibers, fragments invisible to ordinary observation. Investigators had preserved them almost out of habit. Future science would transform them into something entirely different. Elsewhere across America, criminal investigations were beginning to change forever. DNA profiling emerged. At first, it appeared almost miraculous. Cases once considered impossible suddenly became solvable. Wrongful convictions were overturned. Unknown victims received names. Violent offenders who believed themselves untouchable found decades-old evidence pointing directly toward them. Every breakthrough inspired renewed optimism among cold case investigators. Patricia Lockwood's file inevitably returned to the table. Could her evidence still contain usable biological material? Would enough remain after so many years? Laboratory specialists approached such questions cautiously. Time can damage evidence. Improper storage can destroy it. Environmental exposure can leave almost nothing recoverable. No one wanted to promise Patricia's family another breakthrough that would dissolve into disappointment. The evidence underwent careful review. Technicians examined preserved materials using methods unimaginable during the original investigation. Minute samples suddenly carried extraordinary value. Detectives watched laboratory updates with restrained optimism. Science rarely moves quickly. Each analysis required patience. Every result demanded verification. Hope returned cautiously. Not because investigators suddenly had a suspect. Because for the first time in years, they had possibility. That difference mattered enormously. Yet possibility alone does not solve murders. Even if investigators obtained a DNA profile, another obstacle immediately appeared. Whose DNA would it be compared against? In the early years of forensic genetics, comparison required a known individual. No suspect meant no comparison. No comparison meant no identification. The evidence could finally speak. But nobody yet knew whose voice it carried. That limitation frustrated detectives almost as much as the original investigation itself. Technology had opened one locked door while revealing another. Still, they refused to stop. Databases expanded. States shared more information. National cooperation improved dramatically compared with the fragmented investigative landscape of the early 1970s. Cold case units emerged specifically to revisit forgotten murders. Experienced investigators developed a unique mindset. Unlike active homicide detectives racing against time, cold case investigators battled history itself. Every interview required locating people who had moved away decades earlier. Some witnesses had died. Others suffered memory loss. Addresses no longer existed. Businesses had closed. Entire neighborhoods had changed beyond recognition. The physical landscape itself had become another obstacle. Roads widened. Buildings disappeared. Trees matured. Fields transformed into shopping centers. Trying to reconstruct Patricia's final journey sometimes felt like solving a crime committed in another world. Yet one thing remained unchanged. Evidence. Unlike memory, properly preserved evidence does not exaggerate. It does not speculate. It does not invent. If protected carefully enough, it waits. Patiently. Silently. For someone capable of understanding it. Investigators increasingly believed Patricia's evidence had survived that long wait. Laboratory reports began producing results impossible only a few years earlier. Partial genetic profiles evolved into stronger ones. Analysts refined earlier conclusions. Every scientific advancement squeezed a little more information from material collected before many modern detectives had even been born. The killer almost certainly remained unaware. He may have believed the investigation ended decades ago. Perhaps he occasionally remembered Patricia. Perhaps he convinced himself no evidence remained. Perhaps he even believed investigators had forgotten his existence entirely. If so, he misunderstood cold cases completely. Cold cases do not disappear. They sleep. And every improvement in forensic science has the potential to wake them. Across the country, decades-old murders were suddenly making headlines again. Families received long-awaited phone calls. Arrests occurred 40 years after crimes had been committed. Newspapers described elderly suspects entering courtrooms to answer accusations rooted in another lifetime. Those stories inspired investigators everywhere. If justice could arrive after 4 decades, why not 5? Patricia Lockwood's case quietly moved from historical tragedy toward renewed possibility. Not because a witness suddenly remembered everything. Not because someone confessed. Not because an anonymous caller finally revealed the truth. Because molecules preserved inside sealed evidence had survived long enough to outlast the lies of the man who left them behind. No detective in 1972 could have predicted exactly how that transformation would unfold. They simply collected everything they could, hoping the future might someday accomplish what the present could not. Now that future was finally arriving, and somewhere hidden within the smallest traces imaginable lay the first real opportunity in nearly half a century to identify the shadow who had walked away from Patricia Lockwood's murder, believing that time would always remain his greatest ally. The first breakthrough did not arrive with flashing lights, dramatic courtroom revelations, or a detective racing through the night to make an arrest. It arrived quietly, almost invisibly, inside a forensic laboratory where scientists spent their days staring at data that most people could never understand. Rows of numbers, peaks on a computer screen, fragments of genetic code measured in microscopic quantities. It was painstaking work, the kind that demanded patience instead of instinct. Yet hidden inside those silent sequences was something investigators had been chasing for nearly 50 years, a biological signature that belonged to someone other than Patricia Lockwood. For the first time since the murder, the investigation possessed something tangible that had not existed in 1972. A DNA profile. It was incomplete by modern standards, but it was real. Enough to prove the killer had left part of himself behind. Enough to remind detectives that no matter how carefully someone believes they have erased their presence, the human body has a remarkable habit of betraying its owner. Every touch leaves traces. Every struggle tells a story. Every violent encounter risks creating evidence that cannot be seen with the naked eye. The killer had escaped the detectives of the 1970s. He had escaped the investigators of the 1980s. He had survived renewed scrutiny in the 1990s. But biology had never stopped waiting. The discovery energized the cold case team. Boxes that had remained closed for years were opened again. Investigative summaries were rewritten. Old suspect lists returned to the table. Every individual previously questioned suddenly became relevant once more. Could any of them be connected to the newly developed DNA profile? Detectives requested comparisons whenever legally possible. Known offenders whose DNA existed in criminal databases became obvious starting points. One by one, profiles were examined. No match. Another comparison. No match. Another. Still nothing. The laboratory results confirmed that the offender's DNA existed. The databases simply did not know whose DNA it was. At first glance, that felt discouraging. In reality, it represented progress. 50 years earlier, investigators had not even known the killer had left recoverable biological evidence. Now they knew he had. That single fact transformed the direction of the case. Attention shifted from eyewitness testimony toward forensic science. The evidence itself became the primary witness. Meanwhile, detectives reconsidered every theory developed over previous decades. Was the offender a local resident? Did he leave the area shortly afterward? Had he died without ever being questioned? Could he have committed other crimes elsewhere under another jurisdiction? Law enforcement agencies across multiple regions were contacted. Similar homicides were reviewed. Unsolved assaults involving young women attracted renewed attention. Patterns were compared. Victim profiles analyzed. Crime scene characteristics examined. Investigators search for repetition. Predators often repeat behavior. Not perfectly. Not identically. But enough to leave recognizable signatures. Some similarities appeared promising. Others disappeared under closer scrutiny. No definitive connection emerged. The murderer remained anonymous. Still, something important had changed. For decades, investigators had searched outward. Now they began searching inward. Instead of asking who might have committed the crime, they asked what the evidence itself could reveal about the offender. Biological sex. Possible ancestry. The science could not provide a name. Not yet. But it could begin sketching the outline of the person investigators were seeking. As forensic technology advanced through the early 21st century, another revolution quietly began changing criminal investigations around the world. Genetic genealogy. Unlike traditional DNA databases built from convicted offenders or voluntary law enforcement samples, genetic genealogy relied upon family relationships. People mailed DNA samples to ancestry companies, hoping to discover distant cousins or learn more about family history. Few imagined their curiosity would someday help solve murders committed generations earlier. The principle sounded almost unbelievable. If investigators could not identify the killer directly, perhaps they could identify one of his relatives. distant cousin, a second cousin, even a third cousin. Family trees branch outward in astonishing ways. One unknown profile might eventually connect to hundreds of living descendants. Suddenly, detectives no longer needed the killer to volunteer his DNA. They needed biology to reveal his family. That possibility transformed countless cold cases across America. Murders abandoned for decades suddenly returned to active investigation. Communities watched elderly suspects led into courtrooms. Victims' families received answers after lifetimes of waiting. Each successful case inspired other departments to reconsider forgotten evidence. Could Patricia Lockwood's investigation become one of them? The question no longer seemed unrealistic. It seemed possible. Even so, possibility required extraordinary preparation. Genetic genealogy is not magic. It is meticulous detective work layered upon advanced science. Laboratory specialists first needed a DNA profile of sufficient quality. Genealogists then examined potential family connections. Historical records followed. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, military service records, obituaries, census documents, newspaper archives. Every branch of every family tree demanded verification. One incorrect assumption could send investigators down an entirely false path. Weeks became months. Months became years. The work continued largely outside public view. Unlike television dramas, real investigations rarely unfold in dramatic bursts. They progress through thousands of tiny decisions. One document, one comparison, one carefully verified relationship at a time. Inside conference rooms, enormous family trees gradually expanded across walls. Names multiplied. Generations overlapped. Unknown individuals slowly transformed into possible candidates. Investigators began eliminating entire branches. Wrong age. Wrong location. Impossible timeline. The list narrowed. Not quickly, but steadily. Every eliminated possibility brought detectives one step closer to the truth. Some investigators privately admitted they had never experienced anything quite like it. Traditional homicide investigations typically shrink suspect pools through interviews and evidence. Genetic genealogy often begins with thousands of strangers connected only by distant ancestry. The challenge lies not in finding people. The challenge lies in excluding nearly all of them. Every surviving candidate demanded deeper examination. Employment histories, residential records, travel patterns, military service, criminal records, known associates. Anything capable of placing someone within Patricia Lockwood's world in 1972. One question echoed through every meeting. Could this individual realistically have crossed paths with Patricia? If the answer became impossible, investigators moved on. Another branch. Another name. Another possibility. Years earlier, such painstaking work would have seemed unimaginable. Now it represented the most promising path the investigation had ever possessed. Meanwhile, Patricia's family knew little about the technical details unfolding behind laboratory doors. Cold case detectives often remain cautious when communicating with victims' relatives. Hope can be dangerous. Families who have endured decades of disappointment understand that better than anyone. An encouraging update may still lead nowhere. A promising suspect may eventually be excluded. Investigators refuse to celebrate prematurely. Only certainty would matter. Only evidence capable of surviving courtroom scrutiny. The killer, wherever he was, almost certainly remained unaware of these developments. Perhaps he believed advances in forensic science applied only to recent crimes. Perhaps he assumed biological evidence collected in 1972 had long since degraded beyond usefulness. Perhaps he simply never imagined that strangers exploring their ancestry could unknowingly expose a murderer hidden somewhere within their own extended family. History was beginning to prove otherwise. Again and again. Across the country, the phrase cold case slowly changed meaning. It no longer implied hopelessness. It suggested patience. Cases once considered impossible suddenly appeared solvable. Investigators increasingly viewed old evidence as investments in the future rather than relics of failure. Patricia Lockwood's murder embodied that philosophy perfectly. Nothing about the original investigation had been careless. The detectives had worked tirelessly. They simply lacked tools that had not yet been invented. Now those tools existed. Science had finally caught up with evidence collected by investigators who could never have imagined the world that would eventually examine it. The cold case team understood something else as well. Identifying a suspect would only mark the beginning. After 50 years, prosecutors would face enormous challenges. Witnesses had died. Memories had faded. Some physical evidence had inevitably deteriorated despite careful preservation. Every conclusion would require exceptional documentation. Defense attorneys would scrutinize every procedural step, every laboratory method, every chain of custody. Justice delayed remains justice pursued, but it also becomes vastly more complicated. That reality never discouraged the investigators. If anything, it made them more determined. Patricia had waited half a century. Another few careful months meant little compared with ensuring the truth could withstand every legal challenge. As the family tree narrowed further, one name began attracting increasing attention. At first, it appeared no more significant than dozens before it. A historical record, an address, a timeline. Then another document surfaced. Another connection. Another coincidence that no longer looked accidental. Investigators resisted drawing conclusions too early. Experience had taught them caution. Still, conversations inside the investigative team gradually changed. Instead of discussing broad possibilities, they began discussing one individual more frequently than the others. His life intersected with the geography of the case. His age fit. His movements appeared increasingly relevant. Most importantly, biology suggested he belonged precisely where the expanding family tree had quietly been pointing all along. The mystery that had haunted Patricia Lockwood's murder for nearly 50 years was no longer an endless field of unknown faces. It was beginning to contract toward a single human being, a man who had spent decades believing the past could never reach him, unaware that every generation born after the crime had unknowingly helped build the scientific pathway that was now leading investigators steadily, relentlessly, and perhaps for the very first time, directly toward his name. The investigation had reached a point where instinct was no longer enough. Every decision now rested on evidence that could survive the harshest scrutiny imaginable. Detectives understood the weight of what lay ahead. Identifying a possible suspect after half a century was extraordinary. Proving beyond reasonable doubt that he was Patricia Lockwood's killer would be something else entirely. The room where investigators gathered looked nothing like the detective offices of 1972. The cigarette smoke was gone. The overflowing ashtrays had disappeared. Computer monitors had replaced stacks of handwritten notes. Digital maps covered walls once occupied by paper charts. But one thing had not changed. Patricia's photograph still sat at the center of every discussion. She remained 21 forever. The people searching for her killer had changed generations. She never would. The genetic genealogy work continued with remarkable precision. Family branches that had once seemed impossibly large now narrowed into smaller clusters. Every birth certificate confirmed another relationship. Every marriage record connected another generation. Every obituary filled another gap in the family history. What had begun with anonymous DNA was slowly becoming a recognizable bloodline. One investigator later described the process as assembling a puzzle without knowing what the finished picture looked like. Thousands of pieces, hundreds of names, Only one person fit every requirement. Still, detectives refused to rush. The consequences of a mistake would be devastating. Not only could an innocent person become the focus of an investigation, but Patricia's family could once again experience the crushing disappointment that had followed so many promising leads over the decades. Everything had to be verified. Twice. Sometimes 3 times. Historical records were compared against census documents. Employment files were reviewed. Property records examined. Military registrations checked. Old driver's license information resurfaced from archived databases. Every document answered one question while creating another. Where exactly had the man lived in 1972? Could he have encountered Patricia? Did his daily routine place him near the locations investigators had reconstructed from the original case? The answers slowly aligned. Not perfectly, but consistently. Patterns that once seemed invisible began emerging with startling clarity. The suspected individual had geographical ties that investigators could no longer ignore. He was neither a random stranger living hundreds of miles away, nor someone whose connection depended on unlikely coincidence. His life intersected with Patricia's world. That realization changed the atmosphere inside the investigation. For decades, detectives had chased possibilities. Now they were evaluating probabilities. There is a profound psychological difference between searching for anyone and searching for one specific person. The case suddenly became more focused, more disciplined, more dangerous. Because once investigators begin concentrating on a single suspect, confirmation bias becomes a genuine threat. Experienced detectives know this better than anyone. Every new piece of evidence must be tested not to confirm a theory, but to challenge it. Could this evidence point somewhere else? Could another explanation exist? Could investigators be overlooking something obvious? Those questions became routine. Every meeting ended with someone playing the skeptic. Every conclusion invited criticism. Every assumption demanded proof. Only after surviving relentless internal scrutiny would any finding move forward. Meanwhile, forensic scientists continued extracting every possible detail from the preserved evidence. Technology had advanced dramatically since the original investigation. Processes that once required large biological samples could now work with astonishingly small amounts. Methods unimaginable in the early 1970s became standard laboratory practice. Evidence that had appeared exhausted decades earlier revealed new information under modern examination. The case itself seemed almost alive again. Every advancement in science breathed fresh energy into an investigation many had quietly assumed would never be solved. Outside law enforcement, the public remained largely unaware. Cold case work often unfolds in silence. Unlike active manhunts, there are no daily press conferences. No helicopters circling neighborhoods. No dramatic announcements. Investigators deliberately protect sensitive developments. If the suspect is alive, premature publicity could influence witnesses, contaminate future testimony, or even alert the individual under investigation. Silence becomes strategy. The detectives embraced it. They interviewed people connected to the suspect without revealing the full purpose of their questions. Neighbors described him as ordinary. Coworkers remembered routine conversations. Friends spoke about hobbies, employment, family gatherings. Nothing immediately resembled the image many people expect when imagining a murderer. That itself was unsettling. Hollywood often portrays killers as visibly monstrous. Reality is rarely so accommodating. Violent offenders frequently blend into everyday life with remarkable success. They mow lawns, attend birthdays, help neighbors, wave politely across fences. They become so ordinary that suspicion never lingers. Investigators had witnessed this phenomenon repeatedly throughout their careers. Normal appearances prove nothing. Neither innocence nor guilt. Only evidence matters. The suspect's life stretched across decades after Patricia's death. Employment histories suggested stability. Residential records showed years passing without attracting widespread attention. To anyone unaware of the investigation, he appeared to have lived an unremarkable existence. Yet detectives could never escape one haunting possibility. If their theory proved correct, then every ordinary day he experienced had been built upon a secret carried since 1972. A secret Patricia never had the opportunity to reveal. As genealogists refined the family tree, confidence steadily increased. The DNA pathway repeatedly returned to the same branch. The same relatives. The same lineage. Investigators began discussing next steps. Modern homicide investigations require more than genealogical suggestions. Family trees generate investigative leads. They do not establish guilt. Independent confirmation remained essential. That meant obtaining the suspect's DNA directly, without his knowledge, without violating legal procedures, without jeopardizing the investigation. This phase demanded extraordinary patience. Contrary to popular belief, detectives cannot simply seize someone's genetic material without legal justification. Instead, investigators often rely on abandoned items voluntarily discarded in public. A drinking cup, a tissue, a cigarette, anything carrying biological material that the law recognizes as abandoned property. But even that process requires careful planning. The wrong sample, the wrong individual, the wrong chain of custody. Any mistake could undermine years of work. Surveillance began discreetly, not the cinematic surveillance of speeding cars and dramatic foot pursuits. Real surveillance is quieter. Long hours inside parked vehicles. Routine observations. Detailed reports. Waiting. Watching. Recording. Investigators studied daily habits. Departure times. Frequent locations. Patterns repeated with remarkable consistency. Routine, detectives know, often becomes the greatest ally of surveillance teams. Eventually, everyone follows habits. Eventually, everyone discards something. The question was simply when. Days passed. Then weeks. The opportunity finally arrived during what appeared to be another completely ordinary moment. The suspect discarded an item containing biological material. To him, it meant nothing. To investigators, it represented perhaps the most important piece of evidence collected since Patricia's murder itself. The item entered evidence under meticulous documentation. Every transfer recorded. Every seal verified. Every laboratory protocol followed precisely. No shortcuts. None could be afforded. Scientists compare the abandoned DNA with the biological profile preserved from Patricia Lockwood's case. Laboratory analysts deliberately worked without emotion. Their responsibility was not to solve mysteries. It was to report facts. Either the profiles matched, or they did not. Nothing in between mattered. Detectives waited. Waiting had defined the investigation for nearly 50 years. Another few days seemed insignificant. Yet those final days carried unbearable tension. Entire careers had quietly led to this moment. Retired investigators called former colleagues seeking updates. Some who had worked the original case were no longer alive to witness what might happen next. Others followed developments with cautious optimism, understanding better than anyone how quickly hope can disappear inside a homicide investigation. Then the laboratory completed its analysis. The comparison did not rely upon opinion. It did not depend on memory. It did not ask witnesses to recall events from another generation. It relied upon biology. The same biology preserved inside evidence collected decades earlier. The findings pointed investigators in one unmistakable direction. The DNA recovered during the investigation was consistent with the individual, they had spent months quietly identifying through genetic genealogy. For the first time in nearly 50 years, Patricia Lockwood's murder was no longer an investigation searching for an unknown offender. It had become an investigation centered on a specific man. Inside the task force, the emotional reaction remained restrained. There were no celebrations. No applause. Experienced homicide detectives understand that identifying a suspect is not the same as delivering justice. The hardest part still remained. Because one devastating question now confronted everyone involved. The man identified through decades of patient detective work had lived an entire lifetime since Patricia was murdered. And time, which had finally helped reveal his identity, might also have stolen away the one thing Patricia's family had been waiting half a century to see. A courtroom. The revelation spread through the investigative team with the quiet gravity that accompanies the most consequential moments in law enforcement. There were no raised voices, no triumphant declarations, only a profound understanding that nearly 50 years of uncertainty had narrowed to a single individual. Detectives who had inherited Patricia Lockwood's file from mentors who had themselves inherited it from the original investigators now found themselves standing at the threshold that generations before them had hoped to reach. The suspect had a name, a history, a documented life. Most importantly, he had a DNA profile that investigators believed connected him directly to evidence preserved from Patricia's murder. Yet the question haunting every member of the task force was no longer whether science had identified a likely offender. It was whether justice had arrived too late. The passage of half a century changes more than technology. It changes people. Witnesses disappear. Evidence inevitably deteriorates. Families grow older. And suspects age as well. Detectives immediately began assembling the most comprehensive timeline ever created in the case. Everything known about the suspect's life was laid out chronologically. Where he had lived, where he had worked, who knew him, how often he had moved, whether he had ever come to the attention of law enforcement, whether any unexplained periods existed in his history. The resulting picture was unsettling not because it revealed a career criminal. It did not. On paper, his life appeared remarkably ordinary. Employment records suggested stability. Tax records reflected routine responsibilities. Neighbors remembered a quiet man. Former coworkers described someone who rarely attracted attention. There was no notorious criminal history waiting to be uncovered. No string of violent arrests. No obvious warning signs. For detectives, that was both surprising and familiar. Again and again, cold case investigations had demonstrated that some violent offenders committed a single devastating crime and then disappeared into ordinary society. Not because they had changed. Not necessarily because they felt remorse. But because opportunity, circumstance, or simple luck allowed them to avoid detection. The investigators resisted making assumptions about the suspect's psychology. The evidence could establish identity. It could establish biological presence. It could not explain motive. That distinction remained essential. Speculation had already consumed too much of Patricia's case over the decades. Now every statement required factual support. Every conclusion had to withstand legal scrutiny. Prosecutors joined the investigation as the evidence continued to accumulate. Unlike detectives, prosecutors view cases through an entirely different lens. Investigators ask whether someone committed the crime. Prosecutors ask whether 12 jurors can be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are not always the same question. The case underwent exhaustive legal review. Could the chain of custody be demonstrated continuously across 5 decades? Had every transfer of evidence been properly documented? Would modern forensic techniques satisfy courtroom standards when applied to material collected under procedures established in the early 1970s? Experts examined every step. Original evidence logs, laboratory reports, storage conditions, photographic documentation, handwritten notes preserved by detectives who had long since retired. Every page mattered. One missing signature, one unexplained gap, one improperly sealed package. Any of these could create opportunities for legal challenge. The remarkable care taken by the original investigators now proved invaluable. Although they could never have anticipated DNA technology, they had preserved Patricia's evidence with exceptional diligence. That professionalism bridged nearly half a century. The detectives who first handled the investigation had unknowingly prepared the foundation for scientific techniques that would not exist until decades after many of them had left active service. As legal preparations continued, investigators quietly examined another uncomfortable possibility. Had the suspect committed other violent crimes? The question demanded careful analysis. Law enforcement agencies compared unsolved cases sharing similar characteristics. Victim profiles, geographic locations, behavioral patterns, time frames. Nothing immediately established a definitive series of connected murders. That absence of evidence carried its own uncertainty. It did not prove Patricia had been the only victim, nor did it prove additional victims existed. Some questions would likely remain unanswered forever. Meanwhile, Patricia's family received developments with emotions difficult to describe. Hope returned, but it was cautious hope. They had endured decades of false starts, promising leads, anonymous tips, public speculation. Every previous breakthrough had eventually dissolved into disappointment. This time felt different. Not because detectives made emotional promises, because science had entered the conversation. DNA does not rely upon fading memory. It does not become confused by rumors. It cannot be persuaded by public opinion. It simply reflects biological fact. Even so, investigators remained careful in their discussions with the family. The evidence was strong. The legal process remained unfinished. No responsible detective declares victory before every necessary question has been answered. Then another reality emerged. The suspect was no longer alive. The discovery fundamentally altered the investigation. For nearly 50 years, detectives had pursued the possibility of placing Patricia's killer in handcuffs. Now that possibility vanished. Death had intervened before the investigation reached him. There would be no interrogation, no confession, no courtroom testimony, no cross-examination, no sentence. Justice, in its traditional sense, had slipped beyond reach. The news affected investigators more deeply than many expected. Some had imagined the moment of arrest countless times. They pictured informing the suspect that advances in forensic science had finally exposed him. They wondered how he might react. Shock? Denial? Silence? Would he confess? Would he continue insisting upon innocence? Those questions would never receive answers. The suspect had carried his secrets to the grave. Yet death did not erase evidence, nor did it erase responsibility. The investigation continued. Official conclusions still mattered. Historical truth still mattered. Patricia's name still mattered. Detectives proceeded with the same discipline they would have applied had the suspect remained alive. Every forensic report underwent independent review. Outside experts evaluated laboratory findings. Genealogical analysis received additional verification. The objective was no longer preparing for trial alone. It was establishing the strongest historical record possible, one capable of surviving future examination, one capable of giving Patricia's family confidence that the conclusion rested upon evidence rather than assumption. Public officials also considered how and when the investigation should be announced. Cold case resolutions require careful communication. Families deserve notification before headlines appear. Investigators who devoted years to the case deserve recognition. Equally important, the public deserves clarity regarding what evidence establishes and what questions remain unresolved. Transparency became essential. Authorities prepared detailed presentations explaining the forensic process, the evolution of DNA technology, the role of genetic genealogy, the significance of preserved biological evidence. This was not simply the story of one investigation. It had become an illustration of how modern science could illuminate crimes committed generations earlier. Reporters soon learned that a major development was approaching. Interest grew rapidly. Patricia Lockwood's murder had lingered in archives for decades. Now it was returning to public attention with extraordinary force. Newspaper editors revisited original coverage from the early 1970s. Television stations searched for historical footage. Former detectives received interview requests. Community members who remembered the murder reflected on how deeply it had shaped local life. Some admitted they had never expected answers. Others confessed they had always believed someone, somewhere, would eventually solve it. The announcement carried mixed emotions throughout the community. Relief, sadness, vindication, frustration. Relief because investigators finally identified the man they believed responsible. Sadness because Patricia's life could never be restored. Vindication because decades of persistence had not been wasted. Frustration because the suspect would never stand before a judge. Perhaps the greatest emotional weight rested upon Patricia's surviving relatives. For almost 50 years, they had lived between uncertainty and grief. Uncertainty can become its own form of punishment. Without answers, imagination fills the void. Every possibility remains alive. Every theory competes for attention. The identification of a suspect finally narrowed that uncertainty. Not every question had been answered. But the central mystery, the identity of the man investigators believed killed Patricia, was no longer hidden behind anonymity. Still, one question lingered stubbornly over the entire investigation. Why? Why Patricia? Why that day? Why a young woman with an ordinary future become the victim of extraordinary violence? The evidence could identify a person. It could reconstruct movements. It could establish biological connections. It could not fully explain human intention. Motives often die with offenders. And in this case, the man investigators believed responsible was beyond questioning forever. His silence would remain permanent. Patricia's silence had never been a choice. His was now protected by death. That imbalance weighed heavily upon everyone involved. The case had achieved what generations of detectives once considered impossible. A name had emerged from half a century of darkness. Science had succeeded where traditional investigation alone could not. Yet the victory remained incomplete. Because justice is measured not only by identifying the guilty, but by allowing the innocent, the grieving, and society itself to witness accountability. In Patricia Lockwood's case, accountability had arrived in the form of truth rather than punishment, a truth earned through 50 years of relentless determination, preserved evidence, and scientific progress, but one that arrived only after the man believed responsible had already escaped the judgment of any earthly courtroom. The public announcement marked the end of one mystery, but it opened another. For nearly 5 decades, the murder of Patricia Lockwood had lived in the shadows of uncertainty. Now investigators believed they finally knew who had taken her life. Yet knowing a name was not the same as understanding a crime. The evidence had drawn a straight line to a suspect. It had not revealed what happened inside his mind on the day Patricia never came home. When authorities presented their findings, they did so with remarkable restraint. There were no sensational claims, no exaggerated promises, no declaration that every question had finally been answered. Instead, investigators carefully explained what modern forensic science had uncovered. Biological evidence preserved since 1972 had been analyzed using technology unavailable during the original investigation. Genetic genealogy had narrowed the search to one family line. Independent DNA comparison had linked the evidence to the identified individual. The conclusion rested on science, not rumor, not speculation, not a confession. The distinction mattered enormously. Experienced investigators understand that evidence has limits. DNA can establish that a person's biological material is associated with a crime. It cannot describe conversations. It cannot explain emotions. It cannot reveal whether violence erupted suddenly or was carefully planned. Those unanswered questions remained locked inside a mind that no longer existed. For Patricia's family, however, the announcement represented something they had almost stopped believing possible. Recognition. For years, they had carried the burden of an unsolved murder. They had watched anniversaries pass without arrests. They had listened as theories circulated through the community. They had answered the same painful questions from reporters and strangers. Now, at last, law enforcement stood beside them with something far more powerful than hope. Evidence. The emotional response was impossible to reduce to a single word. There was relief. There was grief. There was anger. There was exhaustion. Some relatives later described the experience as reopening a wound they had spent decades trying to survive. The pain returned immediately. But so did something else. Validation. Patricia had never been forgotten. The investigation had never truly ended. Every detective who inherited the case had carried part of the responsibility forward. The original investigators, many of whom never lived to see the breakthrough, had not failed. They had simply been born into the wrong era. That realization echoed throughout the law enforcement community. Cold case detectives often describe themselves as temporary caretakers. No investigator owns a 50-year-old murder investigation. Each generation protects it until the next is ready to continue. Patricia's case became a powerful reminder of that philosophy. The evidence collected in 1972 had survived because someone refused to discard it. Someone labeled it carefully. Someone documented its location. Someone believed that even if they never solved the case, another detective someday might. That faith proved justified. The announcement also reignited public discussion about forensic science. For decades, DNA had transformed criminal investigations. Yet Patricia's case illustrated something even more extraordinary. Science had reached backward through time. Technology invented decades after the crime had become the decisive witness. The killer had unknowingly carried his identity into the future. Not through fingerprints. Not through photographs. Not through eyewitnesses. Through biology. The smallest traces imaginable had ultimately become the loudest voice in the investigation. Experts around the country studied the case with interest. It demonstrated the extraordinary value of preserving evidence. It highlighted the importance of maintaining proper chain of custody. It reinforced why even seemingly insignificant biological material should never be dismissed. Many older homicide investigations suddenly received renewed attention. Evidence rooms across the country were searched once again. Boxes unopened for decades were placed back on laboratory tables. Investigators asked familiar questions. Could this case be solved today? Did science finally catch up? Is there something hidden inside these forgotten exhibits? Patricia Lockwood's murder became part of a broader transformation. A reminder that cold cases are not necessarily dead cases. Sometimes they simply wait for the future. Still, one issue continued troubling investigators. Without a trial, the public would never hear a detailed presentation of the evidence inside a courtroom. There would be no opening statements, no witness testimony, no cross-examination, no verdict delivered by a jury. Instead, investigators carried the responsibility of explaining their conclusions directly to the public. That responsibility demanded caution. Every statement required precision. Authorities carefully distinguished between established forensic findings and investigative interpretation. Where evidence was certain, they said so. Where uncertainty remained, they acknowledged it. Such transparency strengthened rather than weakened public confidence. It reflected an important principle. Truth does not require exaggeration. The facts themselves carried enormous weight. Journalists revisiting Patricia's murder found themselves comparing two very different eras of criminal investigation. The first relied heavily upon eyewitness testimony, physical observation, and traditional detective work. The second relied upon molecular biology, advanced computing, and genealogical databases unimaginable in the early 1970s. Neither era alone solved the case. Both proved essential. Without the meticulous work of the original investigators, there would have been no preserved evidence. Without modern science, the preserved evidence would never have revealed its secret. It was a partnership across generations. Detectives separated by 50 years had unknowingly worked the same homicide together. That realization resonated deeply among retired investigators. Some expressed pride. Others expressed regret. Many wondered whether Patricia's family might have received answers years earlier had today's technology existed. Such questions can never be answered. History offers no second investigations, only lessons. The identified suspect also became the subject of renewed examination. People who had known him looked backward through memory, searching for warning signs they might have missed. Some recalled nothing unusual. Others described moments that suddenly appeared different in hindsight. Investigators approached these recollections carefully. Human memory is remarkably vulnerable to new information. Once someone is publicly identified as a suspect, ordinary behavior can begin appearing suspicious. Detectives resisted rewriting history through hindsight. Evidence remained the foundation. Not reconstructed impressions. Not revised memories. Not emotional reactions. The scientific findings remained unchanged regardless of public opinion. That objectivity distinguished the investigation from decades of speculation. For Patricia's community, the case remained deeply personal. Older residents remembered the fear that followed the murder. Parents who once warned their children about Patricia's case were now grandparents. Some visited memorial sites. Others spoke publicly for the first time about how profoundly the crime had affected local life. The murder had become woven into community history. Not simply because it remained unsolved for so long, because it represented a loss that never fully healed. Every anniversary reopened old emotions. Every new development revived forgotten conversations. The identification of the suspect finally shifted those conversations. People no longer asked whether the killer would ever be found. They asked whether justice delayed could still be considered justice. The answer depended largely upon perspective. Legally, there would be no prosecution, no sentence, no imprisonment. Morally, many believed exposing the truth carried enormous value. History now recorded Patricia's case differently. She was no longer remembered solely as the victim of an unknown murderer. Investigators believed they had identified the man responsible. That distinction mattered. It restored part of what violent crime often steals: identity. Not only Patricia's identity as a victim deserving answers, but the offender's identity as someone who could no longer hide behind anonymity. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case remained the passage of time itself. The suspect had lived for decades after Patricia's death. He experienced birthdays she never reached. He celebrated holidays she never saw. He watched the world change. He witnessed technological revolutions. He likely observed countless news reports about DNA solving old crimes. If he followed those stories, what did he think? Did he dismiss them? Did he worry? Did he ever imagine that evidence collected in 1972 still existed? No investigation can answer those questions. Silence protects the dead as effectively as it protects the innocent. Only the living remain available for questioning. Yet silence cannot erase evidence. It cannot rewrite biology. It cannot outlast scientific discovery forever. That became the enduring legacy of Patricia Lockwood's case. Not merely that investigators eventually identified the suspect, but that persistence proved stronger than time. Evidence proved stronger than memory. Science proved stronger than secrecy. And a young woman whose voice had been taken away in 1972 was finally heard through the one witness that never forgot. The microscopic traces left behind on the day of her murder had remained silent for nearly 50 years, waiting inside sealed evidence envelopes while generations of detectives came and went. They never demanded attention. They never changed their story. They simply waited for the moment when humanity possessed the knowledge to understand them, and when that moment finally arrived, they spoke with a clarity that no passage of time, no forgotten witness, and no lifetime spent avoiding justice could ever silence again. For many people, the story ended the day investigators announced they had identified the man they believed was responsible for Patricia Lockwood's murder. Headlines declared that science had finally done what decades of investigation could not. Television reports celebrated a breakthrough. Newspapers described the extraordinary journey from a forgotten evidence box to modern DNA technology. It sounded like the perfect ending. It wasn't. The hardest truth about many cold cases is that identification is not the same as closure. Closure suggests every question has been answered. Patricia's case never reached that point. One mystery had been solved. Several others survived. The first unanswered question remained the most haunting. Why Patricia? Investigators examined every available piece of her life again, searching for some overlooked connection that might explain why she became the victim. They revisited employment records, friendships, daily routines, places she frequently visited, telephone records preserved from an era before digital communication. Nothing revealed an obvious conflict. Nothing exposed a dangerous relationship hidden from family and friends. If Patricia had been deliberately targeted, the motive remained buried with a man investigators believed had killed her. If she had been chosen at random, that possibility was perhaps even more terrifying. Random violence leaves communities with no sense of control. There is no warning sign to recognize, no obvious danger to avoid. Only the unsettling realization that ordinary lives can intersect with extraordinary evil without warning. That uncertainty lingered long after the scientific breakthrough. Behavioral analysts studying historic homicide cases often encounter this same frustration. Physical evidence can identify an offender. Psychology rarely survives as clearly. A DNA profile cannot reveal intention. It cannot measure rage. It cannot distinguish between calculation and impulse. Those invisible elements disappear unless someone survives to describe them, or the offender chooses to explain them. Neither happened here. As investigators reflected upon the case, another disturbing possibility emerged. The identified suspect had carried Patricia's secret through almost his entire adult life. That required an extraordinary degree of compartmentalization. How does someone wake every morning, go to work, speak with neighbors, celebrate holidays, attend family gatherings, and quietly carry knowledge of a killing that remained unsolved for nearly half a century? Criminal psychologists have wrestled with that question for generations. There is no universal answer. Some offenders convince themselves the past no longer matters. Some gradually reshape memories until they become less painful. Others simply refuse to think about their crimes at all. Human beings possess an astonishing ability to separate incompatible realities. A person may appear entirely ordinary while privately guarding unimaginable secrets. That contradiction disturbed investigators more than any dramatic Hollywood villain ever could. Monsters rarely announce themselves. They blend in. That lesson appeared repeatedly throughout criminal history. The people later identified in notorious cold cases often surprised everyone who knew them. Neighbors described them as polite. Coworkers remembered reliable employees. Friends recalled ordinary conversations. Very few ever said, "I always knew." Reality is almost never that simple. Patricia's case fit that pattern with unsettling precision. The suspect's documented life reflected routine responsibilities rather than obvious chaos. He grew older. The world changed around him. Entire generations were born after Patricia's death. Yet the investigation remained quietly alive, even if he believed otherwise. Cold case detectives often compare unresolved murders to buried embers. From a distance, they appear extinguished. In reality, they retain enough heat that the right conditions can ignite them again. Scientific progress became that spark. Once genetic genealogy entered criminal investigations, cases previously considered impossible suddenly became active once more. Patricia's murder was not unique in that respect, but it became one of the clearest demonstrations of why evidence preservation matters. A single mistake in 1972 could have destroyed everything. If biological material had been contaminated, discarded, improperly stored, or simply overlooked, there would have been no genetic profile to examine decades later. No genealogical search. No suspect. No answer. The painstaking discipline of the original investigators became one of the investigation's greatest strengths. Ironically, they never knew it. Many never witnessed the scientific revolution their careful work eventually made possible. Some had already passed away before the announcement identifying the suspect. Their contribution nevertheless remained undeniable. Every carefully labeled envelope, every handwritten evidence log, every documented transfer between storage facilities. Each ordinary administrative task became essential decades later. Justice, investigators often say, is built upon details. Patricia's case proved that principle beyond question. The announcement also prompted broader discussions throughout law enforcement. How many other evidence rooms contain similar opportunities? How many unsolved murders still held biological traces, waiting for technologies not yet invented? Departments across the country expanded cold case reviews. Evidence once considered exhausted received another look. Families received unexpected phone calls. Cases dormant for decades quietly returned to active investigation. Patricia's story became part of that larger movement, not merely as another solved homicide, as evidence that persistence could outlast time itself. Still, there remained a profound sadness impossible to ignore. Patricia never witnessed any of it. She never saw investigators refuse to abandon her case. She never knew generations of detectives continued saying her name. She never learned that strangers working inside laboratories would eventually dedicate months of their lives to identifying the man believed responsible for ending hers. Everything happened too late for her. The answers belonged entirely to those left behind. That reality shaped nearly every public statement made by investigators. They consistently redirected attention away from the offender and back toward Patricia. Her life mattered more than his secrecy. Her future mattered more than his past. Her family deserved recognition more than he deserved notoriety. Experienced homicide detectives understand that balance. Every criminal investigation ultimately exists because someone lost a life. The victim should never disappear beneath fascination with the offender. Throughout the renewed public interest, Patricia remained at the center of the story. Photographs from her youth reappeared in newspapers. Family members described her warmth. Friends recalled laughter that had been silenced far too soon. Those memories restored something often lost in discussions of forensic science: humanity. Before Patricia became a cold case, before she became evidence, before she became an investigation, she had simply been a young woman with ordinary hopes. Violent crime has a cruel tendency to reduce people to headlines. Patricia's loved ones refused to allow that. For them, she remained a daughter, a relative, a friend, someone whose chair had remained empty through decades of family gatherings, someone whose absence shaped lives long after the murder itself. The investigation could identify the person believed responsible. It could never restore what had been taken. As years passed after the announcement, Patricia Lockwood's case gradually assumed a different place in criminal justice history. It became less a story about failure, more a story about endurance. Evidence endured. Investigators endured. Family members endured. Science eventually caught up. That sequence offered hope to countless other families still waiting for answers. Cold cases across the nation suddenly appeared less hopeless than before. Every preserved fingerprint, every biological sample, every unidentified trace carried renewed significance. Perhaps tomorrow's technology would reveal what today's could not. Perhaps another family would finally receive the phone call Patricia's relatives had waited almost 50 years to hear. Yet one image continued haunting those who studied the case. A young woman beginning an ordinary day. A future stretching endlessly ahead. Completely unaware that somewhere nearby walked a man whose identity would remain hidden from the world for nearly half a century. He believed time protected him. He believed silence protected him. He believed death would protect him. In one sense, he was correct. He never stood before a jury. He never heard a guilty verdict. He never faced sentencing. But history has its own form of judgment. Names recorded in investigative files eventually become names recorded in public memory. Anonymity disappears. The truth, however delayed, survives. And long after everyone directly connected to Patricia Lockwood's murder is gone, the evidence collected in 1972 will remain one of the clearest reminders that justice does not always move at the speed of a courtroom. Sometimes it moves at the speed of scientific discovery, carried patiently across generations by detectives who refuse to let forgotten evidence gather dust forever, until one quiet day the smallest fragments left behind by a killer become powerful enough to speak across 50 years, and tell the world exactly what the murderer spent a lifetime hoping no one would ever learn. History remembers famous trials. It remembers dramatic courtroom confessions. It remembers guilty verdicts announced beneath the glare of television cameras. What history often forgets are the thousands of investigators who spend decades pursuing answers they may never personally witness. The murder of Patricia Lockwood belongs as much to those quiet professionals as it does to the headlines that finally declared her killer had been identified. It is the story of persistence in its purest form, of people refusing to allow time to become an accomplice. Every cold case investigator understands an uncomfortable reality. The clock never stops working against them. Every passing year steals something. Vittnesesti. Evidence becomes more fragile. Buildings disappear. Roads change. Businesses close. Entire neighborhoods transform beyond recognition. Even language evolves. Descriptions recorded in 1972 suddenly require interpretation by detectives born decades later. The investigation slowly becomes an archaeological excavation rather than an active pursuit. Patricia's case experienced every one of those challenges. When the original detectives interviewed witnesses, they worked with memories measured in hours. The cold case team inherited memories measured in generations. A person who had been 25 years old during the original investigation might now be in their 70s. Another witness might already have passed away. Some addresses no longer existed. Telephone numbers had long since disappeared. Paper records rested inside archives few people ever visited. Finding information became an investigation of its own. Yet one remarkable feature distinguished Patricia's case from countless others. The evidence had survived. That simple sentence concealed extraordinary effort. Evidence preservation is rarely glamorous. No newspaper celebrates properly sealed envelopes. No television station reports on accurately maintained storage temperatures. Yet those invisible procedures ultimately determined whether Patricia's killer could ever be identified. Inside climate-controlled evidence facilities, boxes sat untouched for years. Labels faded. Packaging aged. But the biological traces remained. Waiting. Detectives sometimes refer to evidence as a silent witness. Unlike human beings, it never grows tired. It never changes its story. It never becomes influenced by media coverage. It simply exists. Patiently. The challenge has always been learning how to ask it the right questions. In 1972, investigators lacked those questions. Modern forensic science finally provided them. The success of Patricia's investigation prompted renewed conversations about forgotten homicide files throughout the country. Departments reviewed inventories. Evidence technicians reopened storage rooms. Cases previously considered hopeless received fresh attention. One after another, detectives began asking a familiar question. Do we still have biological evidence? If the answer was yes, another question immediately followed. Can today's science reveal what yesterday's could not? That shift fundamentally changed the philosophy of cold case investigations. Instead of viewing age as the enemy, investigators increasingly viewed age as an opportunity. Older evidence had survived long enough to benefit from technologies never imagined when it was collected. Time no longer represented only loss. Sometimes it represented progress. The irony was impossible to ignore. The very decades that allowed Patricia's killer to avoid identification also allowed science to become powerful enough to expose him. The same passage of time served both sides of the investigation. One side believed it guaranteed permanent secrecy. The other eventually transformed it into proof. That reversal fascinated criminal investigators. It also carried an important warning. Perfect crimes rarely remain perfect forever. Technology evolves. Methods improve. Questions once considered impossible become routine. Every generation of investigators inherits tools unavailable to the last. Patricia's case illustrated that evolution with extraordinary clarity. Retired detectives followed the renewed public attention with mixed emotions. Some expressed satisfaction that the investigation finally reached a conclusion. Others admitted lingering frustration that the suspect had died before facing prosecution. Several reflected on how dramatically policing had changed since the early 1970s. Back then, homicide investigations relied heavily upon interviews, neighborhood canvasses, physical observation, patience. Today, those same skills remain essential. But they now operate alongside molecular biology, digital databases, artificial intelligence, and advanced genealogy. Neither generation solved Patricia's case alone. Both contributed indispensable pieces. The original detectives protected the evidence. Modern scientists unlocked it. One without the other would have accomplished nothing. That partnership across time became one of the investigation's most enduring lessons. Patricia's family often spoke less about revenge than about recognition. Recognition that Patricia mattered. Recognition that someone continued searching. Recognition that her life would not disappear into statistical reports describing unsolved homicides. Families of murder victims frequently describe another kind of pain beyond grief. Being forgotten. As years pass, public attention fades. News coverage ends. Anniversaries become smaller. The world moves forward. Families cannot. Cold case investigators understand this deeply. Each reopened file sends a powerful message. Someone still cares. Someone still remembers. Someone is still asking questions. For nearly 50 years, Patricia's file remained active because generations of detectives refused to let it become merely another number. That commitment ultimately changed everything. Still, even after the identification of the suspect, investigators continued reviewing every available detail. Not because they doubted the forensic conclusions, Because thoroughness defines successful homicide investigations. Could another overlooked witness still exist? Had every relevant document been examined? Were there additional victims connected to the suspect? These questions reflected professional discipline rather than uncertainty. Good investigators never stop asking difficult questions, even after believing they know the answer. The public often imagines criminal investigations ending with certainty. Reality tends to be more complicated. Most cases conclude with overwhelming evidence rather than perfect knowledge. There remains space between we know and we know everything. Patricia's murder occupied that space. The identity of the suspected killer had emerged. His motive remained elusive. His precise movements before and after the crime could never be reconstructed completely. Whether he had considered committing similar crimes before or afterward remained uncertain. History sometimes preserves outcomes while permanently losing explanations. That uncomfortable truth accompanies many cold cases. Investigators learn to live with incomplete endings. Patricia's story also transformed how younger detectives viewed old investigations. Police academies increasingly emphasized evidence preservation, using examples remarkably similar to hers. A seemingly insignificant sample today may become decisive evidence 30 or 40 years later. No investigator can predict future scientific breakthroughs. The safest assumption is that they will come. Collect everything. Document everything. Preserve everything. The future may depend upon decisions made during the first hours after a crime. Those principles existed before Patricia's murder. Her case demonstrated exactly why they matter. As public interest gradually settled, another quiet transformation occurred. Patricia Lockwood ceased being known primarily as an unsolved victim. Instead, she became part of the growing history of cases revitalized by modern forensic science. Universities discussed investigations like hers. Forensic conferences referenced similar breakthroughs. Cold case units pointed towards such investigations when arguing for additional resources. One solved murder can inspire renewed efforts in hundreds of others. That ripple effect extends far beyond a single community. Somewhere else, another family waited. Another evidence box rested unopened. Another unidentified DNA profile sat inside a laboratory database. Patricia's investigation reminded everyone involved that impossible does not necessarily mean forever. Sometimes it simply means not yet. Perhaps the most striking image remained invisible. A sealed evidence envelope resting quietly on a shelf. No dramatic appearance. No extraordinary markings. Just ordinary packaging containing extraordinary truth. For nearly 50 years, people walked past it without realizing it held the future of the investigation. Inside rested microscopic fragments carrying a complete biological identity. Not enough to solve the crime in 1972. More than enough to solve it decades later. Evidence does not become impatient. Always do. Evidence waits. Science eventually catches up. Looking back, investigators recognized that Patricia's murder had unfolded across two entirely different centuries. The crime belonged to one era. Its resolution belonged to another. Very few investigations span such profound technological change. Fewer still survive it successfully. Patricia's did. Not because of luck alone. Because countless individuals across generations fulfilled ordinary responsibilities with extraordinary care. A detective wrote careful notes. An evidence technician sealed a package correctly. A laboratory employee maintained storage conditions. A genealogist followed another branch of a family tree. A forensic scientist repeated one more test rather than accepting uncertainty. None of those actions appeared historic at the time. Together, they became history. And somewhere within that long chain of quiet dedication lies perhaps the greatest legacy of Patricia Lockwood's case. It is not merely that science eventually identified the man investigators believed ended her life. It is that justice, even when delayed beyond imagination, is built not from dramatic moments, but from thousands of careful decisions made by ordinary people who refuse to accept that the passing of time should ever become a reason to stop searching for the truth. By the time Patricia Lockwood's name returned to national attention, the world that had known her disappearance had almost completely transformed. The streets she once traveled looked different. The technology used to investigate her murder belonged to another age. The detectives who first walked through the crime scene had become memories themselves. Yet one thing remained unchanged. A family was still waiting for answers. For decades, Patricia's loved ones had lived with a question that had no ending. Who did this? The uncertainty was not a single moment of pain. It was a permanent condition. Every anniversary carried the same weight. Every family gathering carried the absence of someone who should have been there. Every photograph became a reminder of a future that was stolen before it could begin. When investigators finally revealed that modern forensic science had identified the man they believed responsible, the news brought a complicated mixture of emotions. For some, it was the conclusion of a nightmare. For others, it was the reopening of wounds that had never fully healed. Because solving a cold case does not erase the crime. It only changes the questions. For 50 years, the question had been, who killed Patricia Lockwood? Now another question remained. How could someone live an entire lifetime carrying such a secret? The answer would never come from the suspect himself. That was one of the most frustrating realities of the investigation. The person who could explain everything was gone. No interrogation room would reveal his thoughts. No courtroom would force him to answer. No jury would hear the evidence. No victim impact statement would confront him with the consequences of his actions. The legal system depends on confrontation, on accountability, on allowing victims and society to demand answers directly from those accused. In Patricia's case, that moment never arrived. Instead, the investigation ended in a place that many families of cold case victims know all too well. Truth without punishment. Identification without trial. Answers without the justice system delivering a final judgment. For investigators, that created a unique emotional challenge. They had achieved something extraordinary. They had solved a murder that many believed would remain unsolved forever. But they had not achieved the ending they imagined when they first opened the file. There was no arrest photograph. No courthouse steps. No sentencing hearing. Only a conclusion supported by evidence. And sometimes that is the only victory time allows. Throughout the investigation, detectives repeatedly emphasized the importance of separating emotion from evidence. The public naturally wanted to understand the person behind the crime. What kind of individual could commit such violence? Was there something hidden beneath the ordinary appearance? Were there warning signs? Could anyone have recognized danger before tragedy occurred? Those questions are human. They are also incredibly difficult to answer. Criminal investigations often reveal a disturbing reality. People are rarely as simple as we want them to be. A person can appear generous in one part of life and commit terrible acts in another. A person can maintain friendships, employment, and family relationships while hiding behavior that remains unknown to everyone around them. That contradiction is one of the most unsettling aspects of violent crime. The offender is often not a stranger from another world. Sometimes the offender is someone who existed within the same communities as everyone else. That possibility haunted Patricia's case for decades. Somewhere after the murder, the person responsible returned to normal life. The community continued. Families celebrated milestones. Children grew older. Technology advanced. The world moved forward. But behind that ordinary passage of time was an unresolved tragedy waiting to be uncovered. The breakthrough also renewed discussions about the role of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations. Supporters viewed it as one of the most powerful tools ever developed for solving violent crimes. Cases once frozen for generations could suddenly move forward. Unknown victims could be identified. Families could finally receive answers. But the process also raised important questions about privacy, ethics, and the future of investigative science. Genetic information connects not only individuals but families. A person who uploads DNA for ancestry research may unintentionally help investigators identify a distant relative. That possibility created debate among scientists, legal experts, and communities. The discussion became larger than any single case. How should society balance the desire for justice with concerns about genetic privacy? Where should the boundaries exist? Who controls biological information? These questions continue to shape modern investigations. Patricia's case became part of that larger conversation. It demonstrated the extraordinary power of science. It also reminded society that every technological advancement carries responsibility. Investigators involved in the case understood the importance of public trust. Without cooperation, genetic genealogy would not exist as an investigative tool. Without careful procedures, the legitimacy of those investigations could be questioned. Every step required transparency. Every conclusion required proof. The goal was not simply solving one murder. It was ensuring that the process used to solve it could withstand scrutiny. That standard reflected another important lesson from Patricia's investigation. Time may change everything around a crime, but the demands of justice remain the same. Evidence must be reliable. Conclusions must be supported. Accusations must be proven. Even after 50 years, those principles do not disappear. They become even more important. As investigators looked back at the entire journey, they saw a remarkable chain of events connecting two generations. The first generation searched for a killer using the tools available to them. The second generation continued the search using tools the first could never have imagined. Neither generation worked alone. They were separated by decades but connected by purpose. A detective in 1972 could not know that a laboratory technician half a century later would examine the evidence he carefully preserved. A scientist in the modern era could not have solved the case without the foundation created by investigators who came before. That connection represented the true meaning of a cold case breakthrough. It is not one moment. It is thousands of moments, thousands of choices, thousands of people doing their jobs correctly even when the result may not come during their lifetime. Patricia's story also carried a message for families still waiting. For those who have missing relatives. For those whose loved ones were victims of unsolved crimes. For those who have spent decades looking at old photographs and wondering if answers will ever arrive. The investigation showed that time does not always bury the truth. Sometimes it preserves it. Every evidence box has a story. Every forgotten file has a possibility. Every unanswered question may still have an answer waiting somewhere. That belief has transformed modern cold case investigations. Years ago, an unsolved murder often represented permanent failure. Today, it may represent unfinished work. The difference is enormous. Technology continues advancing. Methods continue improving. What cannot be solved today may become solvable tomorrow. Patricia Lockwood's case became proof of that reality. Yet beneath the science, beneath the databases, beneath the forensic breakthroughs, the story remained deeply human. A young woman lost her life. A family lost decades with her. A community lost its sense of security. No technological achievement could change those facts. The purpose of solving the case was never simply to identify a name. It was to acknowledge that Patricia mattered. That her life mattered. That her death mattered. That the passage of 50 years did not reduce the importance of what happened to her. In the end, the most powerful witness was not a person. It was time itself. Time preserved the evidence. Time allowed science to evolve. Time carried the investigation from one generation to another. The same force that once seemed to protect the killer eventually became the force that exposed him. Because time does not erase every secret. Some secrets survive only until someone develops the ability to uncover them. And for Patricia Lockwood, after nearly half a century of silence, the truth finally emerged from the smallest traces left behind, proving that even the darkest unanswered questions can remain alive beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when justice finally finds a way to speak. The story of Patricia Lockwood's murder ultimately became more than a single investigation. It became a symbol of a question that has challenged law enforcement for generations. How long can someone escape the truth? For decades, the answer appeared to be simple. Maybe forever. In 1972, the idea that a person could be identified through microscopic traces of DNA would have sounded like science fiction. Investigators worked with the tools available to them. They followed leads. They interviewed witnesses. They collected evidence. They searched for answers using methods that had solved countless crimes before. But Patricia's case belonged to a different category. It was a crime where the truth existed, but the technology to reveal it had not yet arrived. That distinction changed everything. The killer was not protected by perfect planning. He was protected by history. He benefited from living in a time before forensic science could fully understand what had been left behind. And for nearly 50 years, that gap between crime and technology allowed the investigation to remain unresolved. But history eventually closed that gap. The modern investigation demonstrated one of the most important realities of forensic science. Evidence does not expire simply because people stop looking at it. It waits. It survives. It remains connected to the moment when a crime occurred. The biological material preserved from Patricia's case became a bridge between two eras of policing. One era built on interviews, observation, and traditional detective work. Another era built on genetics, databases, and scientific analysis. Together, those two worlds finally produced an answer. Yet the path from evidence to identification was not simple. Cold case investigations rarely follow a straight line. They move through uncertainty. They require investigators to revisit old assumptions. They demand patience when progress appears impossible. And perhaps most importantly, they require humility. A detective must accept that previous generations may have done everything correctly and still failed to solve the case. Sometimes the missing piece is not effort. Sometimes the missing piece simply does not exist yet. That was the reality Patricia's investigators faced. The original detectives were not defeated because they lacked dedication. They were limited by the boundaries of their era. Modern investigators inherited their work, not their failure. Every old report became a starting point. Every photograph became another piece of information. Every preserved exhibit became a potential path toward the truth. The investigation represented a rare partnership between past and present. A detective from 1972 and a forensic scientist decades later were effectively working the same case together, separated by time but connected by the same objective. Find Patricia's killer. That mission remained unchanged. Only the tools evolved. As public attention returned to the case, many people focused on the technology. The DNA. The genealogy. The laboratory analysis. But investigators emphasized another factor that mattered just as much. Persistence. Without persistence, technology has nothing to solve. A perfect forensic tool cannot analyze evidence that was discarded. A powerful database cannot help if no one enters the information. A breakthrough cannot happen if investigators stop searching. Patricia's case survived because people continued believing it deserved another look. That belief came from many places. Detectives who inherited the file. Laboratory experts who examined old evidence. Genealogists who followed complex family connections. Officials who approved resources for renewed investigation. And family members who refused to let Patricia become just another forgotten name in an archive. Their combined effort created something rare. A resolution. But the conclusion also revealed the painful limitations of justice. The suspect believed responsible was never brought into a courtroom. There was no public trial. No jury verdict. No sentence. For some, that meant the ending would always feel incomplete. For others, the truth itself represented a form of justice. The debate reflects a difficult reality. Justice has many meanings. The legal system provides punishment through conviction and sentencing. But families often seek something equally important. They want recognition. They want confirmation that their loved one's death was not ignored. They want the world to acknowledge what happened. Patricia's family received that acknowledgement. The investigation confirmed that her story mattered. Her case was never abandoned. Her name remained in official records. Her death was not forgotten. Those facts carried profound significance after decades of uncertainty. Cold cases create a unique kind of suffering because they freeze families in the moment of loss. Without answers, grief remains unfinished. A person cannot fully understand what happened. A family cannot fully process what was taken from them. Every possibility remains open. Every theory remains alive. Solving the case does not bring back the person who was lost, but it can finally close one painful chapter. It can replace uncertainty with knowledge. And sometimes knowledge is the only form of peace available. Patricia's case also changed how future investigators viewed old evidence. The lesson was clear. Never assume today's limits are tomorrow's limits. A piece of evidence considered useless today may become the most important clue decades later. Science is constantly advancing. Methods that appear impossible now may become routine in the future. That principle encouraged law enforcement agencies to preserve more evidence and revisit more unsolved cases. Every unresolved murder became a potential future breakthrough. Every evidence room became a place of possibilities. The impact extended beyond Patricia's investigation. Across the country, cold case units began examining old files with renewed optimism. Cases from the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s. Investigations that had been sitting quietly for years suddenly received attention again. Families who had stopped expecting answers began receiving unexpected calls. Some heard the words they had waited their entire lives to hear. We believe we know what happened. Those moments became possible because investigators refused to accept that time automatically meant defeat. Patricia Lockwood's case stood as one example among many. A reminder that justice can move slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. But slow does not always mean impossible. The investigation also forced society to reconsider the concept of a perfect crime. For much of history, criminals believed certain evidence disappeared forever. Witnesses forgot. Records vanished. Technology moved on. But modern science changed that equation. The past became searchable. The invisible became visible. The forgotten became discoverable. A person could spend decades believing they had escaped accountability, only to discover that a single decision made years earlier had preserved the evidence needed to identify them. That reality transformed criminal behavior itself. Every offender now operates in a world where science continues improving. A crime committed today may be solved tomorrow. A crime committed decades ago may be solved next year. Time is no longer guaranteed protection. For Patricia's killer, if investigators' conclusions are correct, the belief that the past was permanently buried proved wrong. The evidence survived. The investigation survived. Patricia's memory survived. The final chapter arrived not through a confession, not through a dramatic pursuit, but through patience, through science, through decades of people refusing to stop asking questions. And perhaps that is the most powerful lesson of the entire case. Some mysteries do not disappear. They wait. They wait inside forgotten files. They wait inside preserved evidence. They wait inside the memories of those who refuse to forget. The world around them changes. Technology changes. People change. But the truth remains connected to the moment it was created. For 50 years, the evidence connected to Patricia Lockwood's murder remained silent. Then, when science finally learned how to listen, it revealed the answer that generations of investigators had searched for. Not because the truth had suddenly appeared. Because the truth had been there all along, waiting for someone to find it. And as the final pieces of Patricia Lockwood's story settled into place, one message remained stronger than the passage of time itself. A victim's voice may be taken away. A case may grow cold. A mystery may seem impossible. But as long as evidence survives and someone continues searching, the past is never completely silent.